In the summer of 1823, 9 white men locked themselves inside the Briarwood plantation house. By morning, 2 were missing. The others refused to speak. And the slave they had chained in the cellar was gone. No broken doors. No blood on the floors. No signs of escape. Just silence, and something scratched into the dining room table. You will remember what you made. Briarwood sat far from the nearest town in Georgia, hidden behind thick cypress trees and a dirt road that swallowed wagon tracks overnight. It was the kind of place that thrived on secrecy. Cotton fields stretched like an ocean around it. The air smelled of heat and sweat and control. The men who owned Briarwood were not just farmers. They were church donors, judges, bankers, deacons. They held power beyond those fields. And beneath their house, in a stone cellar that stayed cold even in August, they kept a man named Moses Jackson. Official records described him as strong, disobedient, and spiritually defiant. But other documents, buried in county archives, used different words. Influential, dangerous, unnatural hold over others. Moses had been sold 3 times before arriving at Briarwood. Each former owner reported strange incidents. Livestock dying without cause. Nightmares spreading through the house. Servants refusing to enter certain rooms. But nothing compared to what would happen in 1823. For years, the 9 masters of Briarwood used the cellar for punishment. For discipline. For breaking spirits. What they did down there was never written plainly. It was described only as corrective measures. Then something changed. Neighbors reported screams. Not from the fields, but from the house itself. And then, one by one, the masters began withdrawing from public life. They stopped attending church. They stopped speaking at town meetings. They started avoiding eye contact. And at night, lanterns burned in the cellar until dawn. Something had shifted. And whatever it was, it began with Moses Jackson. Moses Jackson was born sometime around 1795. No exact date. No birth record. Only a note in a shipping ledger listing him as male, unusually silent. From a young age, he refused to cry. When whipped, he did not scream. When starved, he did not beg. Other enslaved men later described something unsettling about him. Not violent, not loud, just steady. He looked at people too long. Not with anger, with knowing. At Briarwood, the masters tried what they always tried: control through fear. Isolation, exhaustion, ritual humiliation. They believed that if a man could be made small enough, he would disappear inside himself. But Moses did not shrink. Witness accounts from surviving slaves, recorded decades later, described something else happening. The punishments became less frequent. The cellar door stayed open longer. And sometimes, the masters went down there voluntarily. One former field worker, interviewed in 1889, said this. They went down proud. They came up quiet. The 9 men who once laughed during sermons began trembling during prayer. They started arguing among themselves in whispers. Then came the night of July 14th. All 9 gathered in the house after sundown. No servants were allowed inside. The cellar door shut behind them. From outside, workers heard shouting, furniture breaking, a scream that did not sound like pain, but like realization. The next morning, 2 of the masters were gone. Their wives were told they had traveled north on business. They never returned. And Moses Jackson? His chains were found unlocked. Not broken. Unlocked. No footprints in the dirt outside. No sign he crossed the fields. But from that week forward, something even stranger began. The remaining 7 masters started behaving as if they were under instruction. They sold property. They transferred money. They rewrote wills. And every document carried the same strange addition at the bottom. By agreement of the seller. No one understood what it meant. But the town began to whisper. In 1824, 1 year after the cellar night, birth records in the county spiked. Not among the enslaved families. Among the masters' households. Wives who had previously borne no children suddenly announced pregnancies. Not 1. Not 2. All 7 remaining masters' families reported new heirs within months of each other. The town celebrated at first. It saw growth, prosperity, blessing. But midwives noticed something disturbing. The fathers refused to hold the babies. They avoided touching them. One midwife later wrote in a private journal discovered in 1912, "The men will not look into the children's eyes. It is as though they fear recognition." The infants were healthy, strong, quiet, too quiet. As they grew, the The children displayed unusual behavior. They did not cry easily. They watched adults carefully. They asked strange questions about the cellar, even though none had ever been inside. One boy reportedly said at age 4, "Father, why do you kneel when no one is there?" The father collapsed that same week. By 1830, 3 of the original 7 masters were dead. Official causes: fever, stroke, infection. But their bodies showed no visible illness. What frightened the town most was not their deaths. It was the funerals. At each burial, the children stood still, expressionless, and the surviving masters avoided standing near them. Something had entered the bloodline of Briarwood, something the town could not name. And beneath the plantation house, the cellar door remained permanently sealed. But locals swore they sometimes saw a faint lantern glow through the cracks in the foundation, even though no one lived there anymore. By 1842, Briarwood Plantation was abandoned. The fields overgrew. The house rotted. But the church in town thrived. It thrived because it never mentioned what happened. The pastor at the time, Reverend Elias Crow, was one of the few outsiders who had visited the cellar after the disappearances. His sermons changed afterward. They became heavier, focused on guilt, on inherited sin, on debts passed through generations. He once preached, "There are acts so corrupt that the earth itself remembers them." Members noticed something else. Every year, on July 14th, Reverend Crow locked himself in the church basement overnight. No explanation, just prayer. Or so he claimed. In 1851, a fire broke out in the church basement on that exact night. It burned only one room. Inside were records, confessions, private statements signed by the original Briarwood masters. All destroyed, except one charred fragment that survived. It read, "We thought we owned him. But ownership is not the same as control. We were made to understand the difference." Reverend Crow died 2 months later. Officially heart failure. Unofficially, he was found kneeling, facing the direction of Briarwood. Eyes open, terrified. The children born after the cellar night grew into powerful men themselves. Lawyers, landowners, politicians. None ever spoke publicly about their fathers. But each continued a quiet tradition. On July 14th, no matter where they lived, they isolated themselves after dark. And in diaries later uncovered in 1933, one repeated line appeared across generations. "He is not gone. He is teaching." Teaching what? And to whom? The land where Briarwood once stood remains empty today. No one builds there. Animals avoid it. And locals say that if you stand still at dusk, you can hear chains shifting underground. Not in pain, in patience. In 1866, 1 year after the Civil War ended, a small orphanage opened just 12 miles from the ruins of Briarwood. It was called Mercy House for Wayward Youth. The building stood quiet and square on a hill, painted white, with tall, narrow windows that made it look more like a church than a home. The war had left many children without parents. No one questioned why Mercy House filled so quickly, but inside the orphanage records, there were patterns. Strange patterns. Children arriving with no clear history. No death certificates for their parents. No traceable family lines. And yet, each child carried a last name tied to the original Briarwood families. Not directly, but close enough to feel intentional. The ledgers were neat, precise, written in the same handwriting for over 20 years. Every July 14th, a new child would appear. Always a boy, always silent upon arrival. The staff wrote the same note repeatedly. Child does not cry, observes adults closely. One caretaker left a personal letter in 1872 that was never sent. They behave as if they are waiting for something. They ask about the cellar beneath Briarwood. None of them have ever been there. The children never caused trouble. They followed rules. They studied hard. But they did something unsettling. They gathered at night in the basement of Mercy House. Not to play, to sit in a circle, quietly. And if a staff member interrupted them, the boys would turn their heads at the same time, as if responding to a single thought. By 1880, Mercy House had produced 7 graduates who later became judges, councilmen, and ministers across Georgia, all descendants of the Briarwood bloodlines, all born after the cellar night. And every one of them funded the orphanage privately. No one understood why, until a court clerk in 1891 found something he was never meant to see. A sealed envelope labeled, "Agreement of the Cellar, Continued." The courthouse in Briar County had one unusual habit. Every July 14th, it closed before sunset. Officially, it was for maintenance. But town elders knew better. Because in 1891, when the clerk named Samuel Whitlow broke protocol and opened that sealed envelope, the courthouse stayed open late. He thought he had discovered evidence of financial fraud. Instead, he found a pact. The document was signed by the 7 surviving Briarwood masters in 1824. It described a transfer of authority, not legal authority, moral authority. The text was fragmented, but one line remained intact. Our lineage will carry forward the instruction. We accept the burden. Samuel Whitlow reportedly laughed at first. Then he noticed something else. Attached to the document were birth records. The same 7 families. Each child listed with a note beside the name. Under guidance. Guidance from whom? There was no signature below that section. Only a handprint. Large. Smudged. Not matching any of the masters. Whitlow brought the findings to the county judge. The judge was a descendant of Briarwood. The courthouse closed early that year. The next morning, Whitlow's desk was empty. His name removed from employment records. His house vacated. Neighbors claimed he left town overnight. But there were no travel logs. No train tickets purchased. And in the courthouse basement, workers later admitted they heard footsteps long after everyone had gone home. Measured. Slow. Like someone pacing. After that incident, the envelope was never seen again. But something changed. The descendants began meeting privately. Not in churches. Not in homes. But in the abandoned fields surrounding Briarwood. At dusk. Always on July 14th. And townspeople began noticing that those meetings were growing. More families. More silent children. Standing in the tall grass where the plantation once stood. Listening. In 1903, a traveling preacher visited Briar County. His name was Father Matthias Rowe. He was known for exposing corruption in southern parishes. He had written essays criticizing inherited power structures and secret societies within small-town churches. When he arrived in Briar County, he was welcomed politely, but no one invited him to Briarwood. On July 14th of that year, Father Rowe attended one of the quiet gatherings in the old fields without permission. He later described the scene in a letter found decades later. They stood in rows. Men in black suits. Boys beside them. No words spoken. They faced the direction where the cellar once lay buried. Then he wrote something more disturbing. There was a sound beneath the earth. Not chains. Not wind. A rhythm. Like breath. Father Rowe interrupted the gathering and demanded explanation. No one responded. The boys turned toward him. Simultaneously. Not angry. Not frightened. Just aware. That night, Father Rowe delivered a sermon in the town church that made no reference to Scripture. He spoke instead about guilt carried through generations. About systems built on cruelty that do not collapse, they mutate. He said, "You believe you buried him. But what you buried was yourselves." The church emptied before he finished. By morning, Father Rowe was gone. His belongings left in his rented room. Window open. Shoes still by the bed. And in the dirt outside the church, someone had drawn a simple phrase with a stick. "We are still under instruction." No one admitted writing it. But from that year on, the July gatherings were no longer whispered about. They were expected. In 1921, Mercy House Orphanage quietly closed. In its place, a new institution rose. The Briar County Reform School for Boys. Officially, it was designed to discipline troubled youth. Unofficially, it received only boys tied, through distant lineage, to the Briarwood families. Records show that enrollment always increased in July, and each boy admitted carried the same behavioral note. Detached, observant, rarely speaks. The school operated under strict structure. Early rising, manual labor, religious study. But one retired teacher, interviewed in 1948, revealed something unusual. The boys were not rebellious. They were patient. They behaved like they already knew how things would end, he said. Every July 14th, the school canceled classes. The boys were marched into the fields surrounding the old plantation grounds. There, they stood in silence for exactly 1 hour. No prayer spoken. No orders given. Just stillness. And witnesses from the nearby road swore that sometimes the ground looked unsettled, like soil shifting gently from underneath. By the late 1930s, several former students of the Reform School had entered state politics. Others became financiers. Some entered the clergy. None spoke publicly about Briarwood. But investigative notes from 1949 reveal something chilling. Each of them kept a private journal. And in those journals, the same sentence appeared: unchanged from 1824. He is not gone. He is teaching. Teaching what? No document ever explains. But in 1950, construction workers attempted to build on the Briarwood land for the first time in over a century. They never finished the foundation, because beneath the soil, they found a door, sealed from the inside. The senator did not threaten Hale. He did not deny anything. Instead, he invited him to talk. They met in the closed Briar County Courthouse after hours. In the basement, among the relocated records, the senator unlocked a metal cabinet and removed a document wrapped in cloth. The original agreement, he said. Hale expected a confession of violence, a pact of revenge. What he read was stranger. After the Cellar Night of 1823, the surviving masters claimed they had experienced what they called reversal. They described being confronted, not physically, but morally, forced to witness their own cruelty from the perspective of those they had harmed. Not once, but repeatedly, until something inside them fractured. The document claimed Moses Jackson did not attack them. He did not escape. He instructed. How? The agreement never explained. It only stated that the masters voluntarily surrendered control of their future lineage. Not property, not money. Perspective. Their descendants would carry memory, an awareness of injustice so deep it could not be ignored. The senator looked at Hale and said, "You think this is about haunting? It isn't. It's about correction." Hale asked where Moses Jackson went. The senator answered quietly. He didn't leave. He stopped being singular. Hale did not understand. The senator continued. The children born after 1823 weren't possessed. They were altered. They carried the knowledge their fathers refused to face. Hale closed the document slowly. Then why bury the door? The senator paused. Because knowledge is heavy, and not everyone is ready to carry it. Outside, thunder rolled over Briar County. And for the first time, Hale realized this was not a story about revenge. It was a story about inherited truth. And truth, when buried, does not disappear. It waits. July 14, 1951. The largest gathering yet formed in the Briarwood field. Men in suits. Boys beside them. No women present. Hale stood at a distance, notebook in hand. He expected chanting. Ritual. Something dramatic. Instead, there was only silence. After several minutes, the senator stepped forward. He knelt. Not in fear. In acceptance. One by one, the others followed. The boys remained standing, watching. Then something subtle happened. No sound. No visible movement. But Hale later wrote, it felt as though the air changed direction. The ground did not open. No figure emerged. But the men rose differently. Lighter. As if something unspoken had been acknowledged. The boys closed their eyes briefly. And when they opened them, they looked less distant. More human. After that night, the July gathering stopped. The Reform School closed within 5 years. Mercy House records were donated to public archives. The fenced land was left untouched, but no longer guarded. Thomas Hale published his final article in 1953. It did not name Moses Jackson as a monster. It did not describe horror. It described inheritance. A system of cruelty confronted not by violence, but by forced awareness. The article did not go viral. It did not make national headlines. But in Briar County, something shifted. Church sermons changed tone. Court rulings shifted toward equity. Old family wealth quietly funded community schools. No one publicly credited Moses Jackson. But in private journals discovered decades later, one final line appeared. He did not make them suffer. He made them see. And sometimes, seeing is more terrifying than chains. In 1976, during the country's bicentennial celebrations, Briar County officials held a closed-door meeting. The minutes were sealed for 50 years. But a partial summary surfaced in 2003. It referenced something called the Continuation Clause. The clause stemmed from the original 1824 agreement of the Cellar. According to the summary, the clause required descendants to do one thing. Never allow the land to be commercialized, not because it was haunted, but because it was a marker, a reminder. If the land became profitable, the memory would soften. If it softened, the lesson would fade. And if the lesson faded, the document did not finish the sentence. The 1976 file also included psychological evaluations of several prominent descendants. Many reported the same internal experience. A moment in adolescence when they understood, not learned, understood, the injustice, the imbalance. the cruelty their lineage had built, and the responsibility to correct it. One evaluation ended with a chilling but calm conclusion. They do not describe an external voice. They describe clarity. Clarity is not supernatural. It does not rattle chains or flicker lights. It simply refuses to let you look away. The county voted unanimously in 1976 to designate the Briarwood land as protected historical ground. No buildings, no businesses, no monuments, just open field, grass moving in the wind, as if something beneath it was still breathing. In 1989, a local college student interviewed one of the last living descendants directly tied to the 1951 gathering. His name was Daniel Crow, great-grandson of Reverend Elias Crow. Daniel was calm, thoughtful, soft-spoken. When asked whether he believed in the legend of Moses Jackson, he smiled faintly. "It isn't a legend," he said. "Then what is it?" the student asked. Daniel paused. A correction. He explained that his family had never described Moses as violent, never called him a ghost. Instead, they spoke of him as a mirror. The cellar wasn't about punishment, Daniel said. It was about reflection. According to Daniel, the original masters were forced to confront the full emotional weight of what they had done, not abstractly, but intimately. Not statistics, not systems, faces, voices, pain, over and over until denial collapsed. They begged for it to stop, Daniel said, and he told them it would, if they passed the understanding forward. The student asked if Daniel ever felt that presence himself. Daniel answered carefully, "No presence, just awareness. It's like being born already knowing something is wrong." He looked toward the open field outside the college library. "The danger was never Moses," he added quietly. "The danger was forgetting." Daniel died in 1992. Natural causes. In his desk, his family found a single handwritten page. It contained one sentence. The instruction was mercy. Today, Briarwood is just land. No fence, no warning signs, just tall grass and a historical marker installed in 2005. The marker does not mention supernatural events. It does not describe a cellar confrontation. It simply acknowledges that the plantation existed and that enslaved people suffered there. Nothing more. Tourists drive past without stopping. Children sometimes run through the field chasing fireflies. But every July 14th, just before sunset, a few residents still walk quietly to the center. Not to kneel, not to chant, just to stand. And remember, there are no more organized gatherings. No secret meetings. The orphanage is long gone. The reform school demolished. The courthouse basement renovated. But the diaries remain. The sealed 1976 file will open publicly in 2026. And perhaps it will confirm what many already suspect, that the most terrifying force in history is not violence. It is accountability. Moses Jackson was never recorded as escaping, never documented as dying. He simply disappeared from the ledgers after 1823, as if the system that defined him no longer applied. Maybe that was the final reversal. The masters believed they owned him, but ownership depends on recognition. And once he refused their definition, he stepped outside it, leaving behind not a curse, but a burden, to see clearly, and to live differently. January 2026. Exactly 50 years after it was locked away, the Briar County 1976 file was unsealed. There were no crowds, no national media, just a few local historians, a county clerk, and a small table in a quiet records room. The box itself looked ordinary, dusty, brown, tied with thin white string. But when the clerk opened it, the room changed. Inside were transcripts, psychological reports, personal letters, and one final document titled, Final Clarification, Agreement of the Cellar. The clarification was written in 1976 by a committee of direct descendants. It did not describe hauntings. It did not claim supernatural intervention. It stated something far more unsettling, that the original masters of Briarwood had been confronted not by a force outside nature, but by the full psychological weight of their own cruelty, reflected back through Moses Jackson's unbreakable refusal to collapse. The document proposed that Moses had done something rare and terrifying. He did not internalize oppression. He did not surrender identity. He endured. And in enduring without hatred, he became impossible to dominate. The masters, faced with someone they could not diminish, were forced into a collapse of their own moral structure. The file described it as an inversion of control. and the descendants inherited not possession, but awareness. Among the documents was a fragile letter dated 1824 and signed, likely written by one of the 7 surviving masters. It read, "We believed power meant shaping others in our image." But he remained himself, and in doing so, he showed us what we had become. The letter continued. He did not ask for revenge. He asked that we remember. No threats, no rituals, just a demand for acknowledgement. The letter described sleepless nights in the cellar, not from fear of attack, but from something far worse. Recognition. Seeing, clearly, the human cost of their actions. One passage stood out. We would have preferred a ghost. We would have preferred violence. But he offered reflection. That reflection shattered them. And in their breaking, they drafted the agreement. Their lineage would carry the memory forward, not as punishment, but as correction. The letter ended with one final line. May the future do better than we did. The historian reading the file in 2026 reportedly sat in silence for several minutes afterward, because there was no monster, no demon, no curse, only the unbearable weight of truth carried across generations. The horror of Briarwood was never supernatural. It was structural. It was a system that normalized cruelty so deeply that it required something extraordinary to disrupt it. Moses Jackson disrupted it by refusing to disappear inside it. The cellar was not a dungeon of chains in the end. It was a chamber of confrontation. And confrontation is terrifying, especially for those who benefit from silence. The 9 masters locked themselves inside believing they were in control. By morning, 2 had fled. 7 remained. Changed. They passed that change forward. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but persistently. The orphanage, the reform school, the silent gatherings. They were not cult rituals. They were attempts, imperfect and flawed, to make sure forgetting did not win. Because forgetting allows repetition. And repetition is the true nightmare. The land was never meant to be sacred. It was meant to be a reminder. No statues, no heroic plaques, just open space where something terrible once happened, and where someone refused to let it continue. If you visit Briar County today, you won't see ghosts. You won't hear chains. You'll see children playing in fields that once held suffering. You'll see schools funded by old family names that quietly redirected wealth. You'll see churches that preach accountability instead of obedience. None of it dramatic. All of it intentional. Moses Jackson's name appears nowhere on the official historical marker. But in private archives, in journals passed through generations, one sentence repeats like a heartbeat. He made them see. And maybe that is the most unsettling legacy of all. Because seeing demands action. It demands change. It demands that systems built on harm face themselves honestly. The Briarwood cellar no longer exists. The door buried in 1950 is gone. The agreement is public. But the instruction remains simple. Remember, not to dwell in guilt. Not to chase revenge. But to refuse the comfort of ignorance. Some horrors scream. Others whisper across centuries. And sometimes, the quiet ones reshape the world.